Welcome back to another episode of Ask V Anything, where you can ask me anything about real estate or living in San Jose or thereabouts. Today, we're excited to have a guest on our show. His name is Robert P. Bergman, Esquire, and he is a lawyer for many, many years, and he goes back. He has a pretty amazing story. We spoke a little bit yesterday. And but the main reason why we're inviting him on today is because he is an estate planning attorney. And if you've seen any of my other videos about probate, estate planning, propositions, taxes, this all bundles into exactly why you need to have a trust. And today we're going to talk to him and ask him a few questions about what happens if you don't have a trust and you have property or an estate larger than $100,000. And yeah, so I'm really excited to have him on board. And but before we enter into that, I want to tell you that next week I'm going to be giving you a pretty big announcement about our business and where we're going with that, and I'm pretty excited about it, and I'll just leave it at that. So I'll make you want to tune into next week's Ask Me Anything. Yeah, pretty excited, and there's a lot of reasons behind why I'm doing this, and yeah. All right, well, so without further ado, let me introduce you to Robert P. Bergman, attorney at law. And you can actually get a hold of Robert or Mr. Bergman at 408-274-0444, or his website is lawbob, LAWBOB.com. And there you'll find a library full of things, of information of why you need to have a trust if you own a property. All right, here we go. You ready to go? Get one of those inversion boards and stretch out your spine.
I don't know, but as long as my clothes fit, you know, that's all I care about.
I actually, back before this whole pandemic thing happened, back in October, I stopped eating sugar at all, except for, you know, like Halloween and holidays. I went hog wild on the sugar, but I actually shrank down 2 sizes in my waist.
Yeah, I think it's been about 6 years ago now that I think about it, maybe even a little more. I was watching my kids playing, and all of a sudden I had one of the, I deal with death and dying as part of what I do as an attorney.
Right.
It's what I talk about regularly with people, and I'm candid with them about it. And I have intellectually understood for pretty much my whole life that I'm going to die someday. That's been an intellectual thing. And, you know, then losing my father, then losing my mother, losing other elderly relatives, passing away one after another. Pretty much that generation is gone now. But watching my girls play, suddenly I had the drop from the head knowledge to the emotional knowledge.
Right.
I was going to die one day. And I'm looking at my girls and I'm going, crap, one of these days, I'm going to literally be gone and they won't have their dad anymore. And it was one of the worst days of my life. I had that epiphany and I felt like crap. And I went to bed that night and it was like, crap, you're going to die, Bob. And the next morning, though, I woke up and the sun came up and the birds were warbling and everything. And I realized, you know what, Bob, you're going to die someday. And you can't change that, but what you can change is your lifestyle. And so I went cold turkey like you did.
Yeah.
I mean, no more candy, no more cookies, no more pies, no more cakes. I started exercising more. I just watched what I was eating. I cut stuff out of my diet completely. 6 months time, I dropped 40 pounds.
That's crazy. Isn't that amazing? Think about 40 pounds. That's like, when you don't think about it, you're like, oh, that's a lot of weight. And then you're like, how many?
I got rid of a toddler I was carrying around.
Right.
That's really what it was.
That's like, how many bowling balls is that? That's 5 bowling balls. That's a lot of weight.
It's a lot of weight.
For your heart.
And the thing was, at the time, I was using a CPAP because I had a severe apnea diagnosis, which was, in retrospect, was largely due to being overweight. So I dropped like 40 pounds in 6 months. I went down from a 42 waist to a 40.
Right.
And my coat size went down. My shirts went from XL to L. And all of a sudden, shirts I hadn't worn for 20 years, I could wear again. Pants I hadn't worn for 20 years, I could wear again.
But they're not in style, so.
Oh, well, you know, I'm talking about like blue jeans and stuff like
right.
that are, you know, timeless. But but then since that time, where am I now? I was at like 235. 235. I got down to 195. Right now I'm at 188 because I was at about 183, 184, and I've gone up a few pounds during this pandemic, even though I'm not eating like everything in sight. Just the sedentary nature of the pandemic is kind of affecting that. I'm not getting as much exercise as I'm used to. But still, I still look at that and I'm now like 45, 46 pounds less than I was at my height.
That's great.
I'm down to a 38 waist.
My
and I'm going to head for 36. If I can get to a 36 waist and get down to 180 or something like that, I'm within 10 pounds of my fighting weight out of high school.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, but I look at like the pictures of my high school friends on Facebook, and like the guys who are like the jocks and everything, and they're 300 pounds and they're obese, and it's like I go, damn, I've aged pretty damn well.
Yeah.
There are people that see me and they go, Bob, you really haven't changed from high school. I said, well, you know, if you saw me 4 or 5 years ago, you might say differently, but now, yeah, I'm just an older, grayer version of myself, and I'll take it. I'll take it. Are you recognizable?
You know, the funny thing is, I think we spoke about it yesterday. I went to a 50th birthday party.
Birthday party, yeah.
Instead of our 30th reunion because we missed it, and it was at the Brit in Cupertino, and people came up to me and recognized me. And the funny thing is, you know, I recognize probably 5% of the people there.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know you. What's your name? And we caught along. But there are like a lot of people there that I just did not recognize, which is
that really, really changed.
Yeah.
That put on 100 pounds.
Yep.
And were unrecognizable. But yet I know that from my high school, there are like women from my school, because even though I went to St. Francis, I was there the year that they went co-educational, when all the young ladies from Holy Cross High School, they closed Holy Cross and consolidated with St. Francis. So, but there are women from there that look virtually exactly the same at 64 and 65 years of age as they did when they were 17.
Yep.
Just older versions of themselves, but you know, crap, some of them, like, they still have the same figure. They could still wear the same clothes.
Mm-hmm.
They're instantly recognizable, and they're just as beautiful at 64 and 65 as they were when they were 17. It's just now it's a mature beauty.
Yep.
It's astonishing to me. One in particular I remember, who is, very petite and everything. She's had 4 kids. And yet, after every kid, she got back to her original size. It's like, that's virtually impossible for women, but she looks exactly the same as high school. She's had 4 kids. I'm astonished by that. Some people, it must be genetic. I know that I have good genetic background because people meet me, clients meet me, and we chat and everything. And I regularly have people thinking I'm at least 10 years younger than my actual age. And when they find out, they go, like, get out, or you're kidding. And it's like, no, I'm actually not 53.
I was going to ask, even in your picture, you look like you're 55, 53, 55-ish.
Yeah, I'm turning 65 this year in August.
Good for you.
Yeah, I have to apply for Medicare about a month from now, or start applying.
That's a whole nother topic.
Yeah. And I mean, we have Kaiser, so I'm probably just going to go back and through Kaiser because it's just easier conceptually. I don't know if our Kaiser bill is going to go up or down because of that. My wife's the primary on it because she's younger. So I don't know how it works. That's not my wheelhouse. But I know that I switch over to Medicare. Yep. I get to carry one of those little cards around now, which I think you can actually prove that you can go to the restaurant and say, how do we know you're a senior? You look like you're only 53. It's like, here's my Medicare card. Oh, well then you must be a senior because you have one of those cards.
It's absolutely an excellent topic. And I did that a couple years back when my mom came down with lung cancer, and I was trying desperately to find information out, and I went to Kaiser because we have Kaiser as well. And I was asking all these questions, and I think your prices do go down, which is massively helpful for you and your wife, but not your children. So you still have to pay for them. But my parents were, they're qualified for Medicare, and they had all these different programs, and it's like trying to figure out the Rubik's Cube. And they have people there that can sit down with you and talk to you about it. And they actually have seminars, and they're, coming from the military, the Kaiser is exactly like going to medical in the Marines. Just like you go to see corpsman, get checked in, and they tell you where to go. It's all automated. Stand over here,
stand over there, swipe here.
Yeah. And it's so much easier than when we had Blue Cross, because like I played hockey, right? When I was younger, I played hockey, and I bashed my finger in, and instead of it bending this way, it bent this way, this way.
Okay. I'm getting
make sure it wasn't broken. So I had to go see my primary, and then the primary had set up an appointment or give me permission to set up an appointment. Then I had to physically make the call to talk to an ortho, and I had to get an x-ray. So I had to make that appointment. And when I went to Kaiser, they're like, oh no, you just go over here. They're ready for you. And then you go over here and they're ready for you, and you do this. And
yeah, I remember a few years back, I like to tell people I was playing rugby or something when I tore my meniscus in my left knee. Actually, I bent down in my office after shifting things around, for shifting furniture around. I bent down to pick up a piece of paper, and the meniscus tore in my left knee, just pop like that, and drove me to the ground. I mean, I had to crawl down the hallway, drag myself to a car, and get to a Walgreens so I could buy a pair of crutches. And so I went in and literally went into my internal medicine guy, who's been my guy for 15 years now, something. We've grown up together. And they said, okay, immediately it was, well, you need to get an MRI done. And I actually went to an MRI center and had it done just private pay. It was cheaper than if I had it done at Kaiser, ironically. I probably saved $500 by going and having it done. Then they gave me like a disc and everything with the results, which I carried back. And it's like, I got a referral to an orthopedic surgeon virtually immediately. It was
Right.
like, well, we'll get you a consult with the surgeon like right away. And went over to the surgical consult. He looked at us saying, yeah, you got a bucket handle tear here. We can't repair that. It's going to have to be removed. You're too old for us to repair it because there's not enough blood flow in your knee at this age to heal. If you were 25 and you did this, we could go in, we could stitch it up, and it would stitch back together and heal itself. But at your age, it's not going to work. So we scheduled the surgery. It was like consult. I had the surgery 2 days later, outpatient. They got me home, had the worst, most painful night of my life after the surgery. I couldn't sleep. It hurt so badly. They gave me Vicodin, and I really do not take narcotics. And so I'm going to suffer through this. And I did. But Kaiser is really good for that kind of stuff.
Right.
You don't have to get a note to take over and make an appointment with this doctor and then make an appointment with this doctor. By the time you're done meeting your primary, they've already say, well, you can head over to the such and such clinic right now. You're in the system. Just go over, check in, and get your blood work done, get your prescription picked up there. That's a thing I like about Kaiser is it is efficient in a way that most bureaucracies are not.
Right.
But they really are efficient, and their emphasis on preventative care is I think it's unparalleled. I mean, and they nag you. They nag you like mom,
Right.
like send back your colon screening test. Do we need to send another one to you? Come on, Robbie, come on, you know what to do. And they keep after you, and they're constantly calling you, and they're emailing you and messaging you and all this stuff. And it can get a little irksome, but at the same time, it's nice to know that they've got your back and they're reminding you of things. I'm getting this screening done.
And the customer service there it's amazing. They're so friendly. I'm always so everybody has complaints about them. Not everybody. I have other friends that are massive fans of Kaiser as well. But people are like, oh no, I love my Blue Cross. I'd rather do this. I'd rather do that. When I had Blue Cross, I adopted the park down here, La Colina Park, about 7 years ago, picking up trash by myself with my dog. And we're hanging out. Back then I was using a garbage bag, and I had a little picker upper stick thing. And I was doing that. I picked up glass and I dragged it across my leg. And I cut my leg open, probably this long.
Wow.
Super painful. I went to Blue Cross because I didn't have Blue Cross. We had to go to I didn't go to emergency. I went to a clinic, and the clinic wound up costing me like $750 after everything was said and done. And then it was like another $150 for him to come and check it the next day to make sure it wasn't insured. And they said, come back and we'll take the stitches out in X amount of days. Like, and I'm going to pay another office visit. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. So I took out the stitches by myself. But they gave me 7 stitches for $750. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So Kaiser would have been like $50 done.
Yeah, they walk in and say, well, here, let's debride the wound, make sure it's all cleaned out. All right, we'll give you a local. Okay, they'll stitch you up right there, cover it with, with gauze or something like that, give you some supplies to change it, and probably put in stitches that dissolve on their own.
That would have been nicer.
Yeah.
I've pulled out stitches before. When I was in the Marines, I was on patrol and landed into some razor wire and cut my knee up pretty bad. And I pulled those out and, just do it.
Okay. So you ready to get this clam bake going?
Yeah. So
be as free form as you want.
Well, yeah. I mean, so
little
what?
Yeah, that's better.
So you focus on estate planning and family, helping families move on to the next step in their lives, right? When people die or their loved ones die, that's part of your stuff. You also manage probate for them?
Well, yes. I don't. The first part is That's completely accurate. I work with families with both the pre-planning and then also the implementation of planning during lifetimes and after people pass away. Um, my primary focus as an estate planning attorney is on what I call foundational estate planning, or the first level of planning that pretty much everybody needs to have. They don't need to have the same intensity of first level planning, but foundational planning would be planning for incapacity, and that would be doing legal documents such as a financial power of attorney, what we call a durable power of attorney. Durable means that the authority survives you being incapacitated. A power of attorney that doesn't do that might be largely useless. If you become incapacitated, but now the authority ends because you became incapacitated, then no one can do anything for you. A power of attorney is just authority granted by you to someone to act on your behalf. And when people say, well, not really familiar with that concept, I would say, have you ever bought a car? Well, yeah, I bought a car. Well, when you went to the dealer, they probably had you sign a power of attorney to transfer the title of the car from them to you through the DMV. They didn't expect you to walk down and stand in line at the DMV to transfer the title. And that's one of the things you signed, was authority for them to sign your name to transfer the title. And banks have them so that someone can have authority to get into your bank account, to transfer funds, to go to a brokerage account, transfer funds, invest for you. So that's what a power of attorney is. The person you appoint is called an agent, technically attorney in fact. I'm an attorney at law, and attorney just kind of means agent. So it's your agent. So when you have incapacity, you need someone who can handle your finances for you if you become incapacitated. You may need somebody who can make medical and healthcare decisions for you if you're no longer capable of communicating with your doctors and they can't communicate with you, and so you cannot make an informed decision of any kind about your medical care. Well, there we have the Advanced Healthcare Directive, which appoints another agent, healthcare agent, that can then make the medical and healthcare decisions for you. So everybody should have, at a minimum, a financial power of attorney and an advanced healthcare directive, even if you don't own a house, even if you don't have more than a relatively modest amount of assets or money in the bank or things like that. This means even kids getting ready to go off to college. Mm-hmm. Your kid's turning age 18, they're now an adult. You may not think so, but they're an adult. Yeah, you're laughing there, Vito. You know what I'm talking about. I turned 18. I can honestly say I wasn't an adult yet. And I think most people, if they're honest with themselves, they'd say that's the case. But going off to college, a kid going off to college should have a financial power of attorney, an advanced healthcare directive, presumably with mom and dad, or mom or dad as the agents, because once they're an adult, you don't have any authority over them or their health care anymore. They're now an independent entity under the law. Yep. Everybody should have a will of some kind. And a will is basically just a legal document that says, when I pass away, who gets my property? Where does my property go? Whatever that property happens to be. It can be very specific about specifically identifying things to go to specific people, or it could just be general, like I give everything to my spouse, otherwise to my kids. So having a will, even a simple will, gives guidelines that can be followed when you pass away. And if you have a small enough estate, which right now is under about $166,000, kind of a weird, unusual number, but that's our legislature for you. you don't have to go through the probate process, which and everyone's heard about probate. And a lot of families have experienced probate. You asked, do I handle probate? The short answer is yes, but I'm getting away from that.
Okay.
Because I find that the probate process for me at this stage of my career is about as exciting as watching paint dry. And it's a lengthy process. I focus my practice on avoiding probate for families because I know it's a long, tedious process. It's expensive, completely public, and is a very inefficient way to pass property on after someone passes away.
It's super emotional, and you know, the thing that I deal with are people that, you know, they're so emotionally caught up with their parent dying, and now they're left with having to deal with this. What do I do? And there's so many unanswered questions, and sure, there's checklists, but who can you trust and who do you do? And you know, it's just all these questions, and I totally agree with you. It's
Well,
but
I can tell you doing probate administration, which is basically the court supervised administration and ultimate distribution of someone's estate after they've died. It is substantively very similar to trust administration, which is administering a trust that someone had prepared ahead of time after they've died. A lot of the same steps are taken. The primary difference has to do with procedurally when are the steps taken and how quickly they can be taken. In a probate administration, just to give you a little timeline, California has the most complicated probate administration process in the country. There's some states where someone dies, you can file for probate and be done with it in a month. A month. Okay, like boom, A to Z, you're done. Everything's distributed. People go on with their lives. So that's kind of, from an estate planning standpoint, that's the functional equivalent of we're going to just rip that Band-Aid right off and let it heal. In California, they're going to slowly tear the Band-Aid off over months. So people get to experience the joy and the pain for months, waiting until the court finally says you can distribute everything to the people who may have been desperately needing that money for the last several months, but they're stuck. Here in California, to commence a probate, and now in this time we're dealing with the coronavirus, probates now, pretty much the courts here in Santa Clara County and in San Mateo County, where I also practice in the probate courts there, everything has to be filed electronically. It used to be you could walk down with your papers, stand in line, talk to a clerk, get a court date, earliest available court date, fill it out on the papers, file the papers, walk out, and then you know, okay, I've got my court date in 2 months. Now, you can't, and that was the beauty. I could actually, even better, I could actually call the court, talk with the clerk at the time, Manny, who always called me Attorney Bergman. You can probably guess where Manny was from originally, just because he addressed me as attorney all the time. It's an honorific. But I would ask Manny, I'd say, Manny, I'm getting ready to start a new probate. What's the earliest date? And he'd tell me the date. I'd fill it out on my paperwork, and he'd reserve me on the court calendar. It's like making a reservation at a restaurant. Well, you're reserved on May 25th at 9:00 a.m. in Department 10. So thank you, Manny. Then I'd finish my paperwork, which might be a couple weeks to gather information, put it together, and then I would file it and file the notice of hearing and tell everybody who's entitled to come. That would save time. Now I can't file for probate until every piece of paperwork's completed and ready to be filed. And then I can get a court date. So right now, the process of going to e-filing has actually made the probate process longer and more complicated than it was before. That's what's ironic here in Santa Clara County. It's actually now a longer process and more complicated by going to the simplicity of electronic filing. So now I have to file the paperwork. I can request, please set the earliest date possible. And then they electronically email back to me the filed paperwork, and they've stamped the date on there. So now I know when my hearing date is. I can also tell them, don't pick anything this week, because that's when I'm in Disneyland. Hopefully that will come back and we'll be going to Disneyland again. But it's going to take 2.5 months, maybe 3 months to get into court here. So now we have someone passes away, the family comes in. I typically tell them, you know, concentrate on burying your parent now.
Right.
Concentrate on that. I could start working here in the background, but concentrate on that. Then we do the paperwork get together. That's a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks. Then we file the paperwork. Now we have a hearing. The hearing is just to put somebody in charge of the estate. Just to start the probate, we're now probably 3.5 months after the person has died. Just to get it started. Other states, we're done. We're done. Everyone moved on with their lives. They can move on with the grieving process without having the financial side hanging over their heads. But here in California, we just got started. But it gets better. Let's assume that someone died and they literally had no creditors of any kind. I mean, you know, no credit cards, house paid off. They didn't owe anybody anything. And they know that. There's no bills whatsoever. The law here in California requires a 4-month period after the probate commences for creditors to file their claims. Even if you know there are no creditors, you have to wait for 4 months, just in case, grandma's gambling debt from Vegas shows up out of nowhere. You know, and so that is mandatory, it's statutory, you have no choice. Right. After that period, then you can file for a final hearing. In the probate, by the way, you also have to do an inventory of everything the person owned, certain assets, real estate, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, retirement plans have to be valued by a court-appointed appraiser called the probate referee, who charges an appraisal fee. Basically, 0.1% of the value is the appraisal fee. Bank accounts can be valued by the executor or the personal representative appointed. I mean, if you have a will, the person's called an executor. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a will, they're called an administrator. Same job, different title. I don't know why. It's a historical, why they say you administer a estate if there's no will, but you're the executor of an estate if there is a will. There's no real difference between the jobs.
And you're a trustee under a trust, right?
Trustee under a trust, yeah. And people regularly say, you know, well, I'm the executor of my father's trust, because people are much more familiar with the concept of probate. And they've heard somewhere, they read somewhere, they saw on a TV show that the executor is the person in charge of the estate. And just as an aside, I have never done the reading of the will that you see on TV and in movies. That just doesn't really happen, you know, and certainly no dramatic. And to my son, John, who is worthless, I leave $5. You know,
it serves you right for not listening to me.
Yeah, exactly. I do have clients that disinherit family members. That is a real thing. Yeah. But they don't have to leave them $1 or something like that. They can just say, I name you and you're dead to me and you're dead to my estate. So, you know, we're done here. But in probate now we're ready to close out the estate. We've paid all the non-existent creditors. We have now filed an inventory, an appraisal of the assets. And a weird thing is you have to inventory someone's retirement plans and life insurance that they had even though it's not probably going to go through probate because it has named beneficiaries on it. You still have to provide in the inventory that they own this. Why? Because creditors might be able to go after it. Just because you say my IRA is going to my son John, if you owe a creditor, that creditor can follow the IRA money to your son John and say, hey, your dad owed us money. We understand you got $100,000 from his IRA. Pay us. What? Yeah, pay us. Oh, you got his life insurance. He owed us $100,000. You pay us because you got the estate. It's not free and clear until there's no creditors anymore. And people have been shocked by that they actually have what they thought was just theirs. It's not, because it may have strings attached to it. So now, guess what? We get to file for another hearing to close out the estate, except in San Mateo County. San Mateo County, you can actually submit the final paperwork ex parte, meaning that you can just file it with the court without a formal hearing. As long as everybody signs off on it, the judge can actually sign the order for distribution of the estate the same day you submit it to the court. That is awesome. That's why the only two probates I'm doing right now are being done in San Mateo County, even though the people died here in Santa Clara County.
Mm.
That's a little known secret of the profession, that if all of the heirs who would inherit from someone agree and consent, you can do the probate in San Mateo County where it's faster. You can get a faster hearing date. You can close out the estate by an ex parte petition. Now the thing is, you have to pay to file the probate. You have to pay to file the petition to close the probate.
Mm-hmm.
There's filing fees at the front end, at the back end. A typical probate, between the filing fees and the fees that you have to pay to give notice to the world that a probate's commencing, you have to publish that in a legal newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, when I do it in San Mateo County, they use the Mercury News is valid for San Mateo County. They also want you publishing in the county where the person died. Well, if it's Santa Clara County, that's also the Mercury News. So basically we get a twofer right there. Filing in the Mercury News covers the requirement for filing in both counties for giving notice. So you're looking at probably well over $1,000 just in court fees and publication fees.
Mm-hmm.
That's $1,000 right off the top. The attorney can charge a statutory fee that starts at 4% of the first $100,000 of value of estate. And then it goes to 3%, 2%, 1%, 0.5%, and then at very high levels of estate, in the multi-millions, what the court deems fair and reasonable. This is a commission. And you know, Vito, you know, you're in real estate. I was in real estate too. I was a broker back in the day.
Okay.
I was actually a broker and general counsel for, you may recall, Century 21 Lad Realty.
Mm-hmm.
We were one of the biggest C21 franchise in the Valley back in the day. We had 4 offices, about 100 agents, and I was general counsel for 2.5 years for them, and also the approval broker for all of the deposit receipts that came through. I'm the one that reviewed them. I'm the one that sent back to the agent and told them, fix this, here's an addendum I want signed by all parties, to make sure that everything was copacetic. Well, you know, as brokers, we get paid a commission based on the sale price typically,
right.
Without regard to the equity that the seller may have in a property. I mean, I think that's a fair statement. And yes, there are situations where the brokers make more than the seller does because the seller has little or no equity. They're trying to get out from under something, maybe a massive loan they can't pay anymore. Well, in probate, attorneys can charge legally a commission based on the gross value of the estate. And the executor or administrator, person representative, gets to charge the same commission. And it's statutory. And to put it in perspective, $1 million estate, which in Santa Clara Valley is not unusual at all, that could be just the house. That's $23,000 for the attorney. And that's just to do the ordinary probate work, nothing extraordinary at all. But if the attorney has to do something like, oh, pursue a lawsuit on behalf of the estate, or defend on behalf of the estate, or take action to collect an asset of the estate, or things like that, those are extraordinary services. And the attorney can actually petition the court for more money, typically on an hourly basis for extraordinary services. And here's the real kicker. Those of us who've lived in this valley say, how many, like watching this, can have lived in the valley long enough to remember when we had the real estate downturn? It feels like a long time ago, but it really isn't that long ago.
Talking about the way?
Yeah, when housing prices dropped, you know, depending where you lived in the valley or the Bay Area, they could have dropped 20%, 30%, 40%, 50% in like almost overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And there were people that had just bought their house and put their 20% down, and then found out 6 months later their 20% down payment had vaporized. It was gone. And now their house was underwater. And just to explain that, I don't know, Vito, you probably talk about that, but that means you owe more on the house than it's actually worth. So you're basically then renting your house at that point, because you don't own anything. You have no equity. You own a house with a mortgage that is more than the house is worth. That basically you've now turned into a renter effectively, because you have zero equity. In probate, if you had a house that you purchased for 1.2 million, and now it's worth $1 million, and you have $1 million loan, in probate, the value is $1 million, not zero. So commissions paid to attorneys and paid to executors are based on the gross value of the estate, not the net value of the estate. You could literally have an estate that has zero equity, zero value in the real world, zero market value, but has thousands and thousands of dollars of fees and costs associated with it to go through the probate process. A number of years ago, I had a friend of mine, a hobby friend of mine, contacted me and said, Bob, my dad passed away. He had this house up in Antioch in the East Bay. And the loan on my dad's house is more than it's worth. And all he really has is just some lousy furniture in the house, and he didn't have anything else but the house. What should I do? And I said, well, the first thing you do, my friend, is don't file for probate for your father. He said, why is that? So if you do that, you are now triggering all kinds of fees and commissions that are mandated by law because you commenced a probate.
Right.
My advice to you is, if you feel generous, call the lender on your dad's property. Let them know, my dad died and we're not doing anything. I said, what do you mean by that? Yeah, tell them that no more payments will be coming. You're not commencing a probate. So basically, have at it. Have them go through the foreclosure process and take the property, because there's no pot of gold at the end of that rainbow.
Right.
It's just not there. Now, sometimes families have no choice. It's like, there's no equity in the house, but we have to keep the house because that's where we live, because that is the residence for the rest of the family, and maybe even more than one generation of the family. So they have to figure out a way to pony up the money to pay for the filing fees, to pay the attorney, to pay everyone else, the probate referee who's the court appraiser, just to hold on to a property that has no market value, but it's still a house. Effectively, they have to go through the process to keep the property. So, you know, and that could be.
On top of that, you're dealing with grief. You're dealing with everything else that's going on. You know, there's a huge cloud of judgment. We always called it the fog of war. You know, in the Marines, it's like when the first shot's fired, all your training goes out the window, and you just have to, you have this cloud of what's going on, right? You're like in this bubble and you're trying to figure out what's going on. It's the same
And
thing when
also your reptile brain takes over.
yeah.
Your logical brain goes out the window. Now your instinctual brain that we all have, you know, it's evolutionary, that takes over. And now preservation and reaction becomes the order of the day.
Right.
And if you're well trained, as I'm sure you were, then those reactions and those actions have been pounded into you, and now they're now part of the essence of you, and you respond on autopilot. Your instinct kicks in, your training kicks in, and now you know that, you know, okay, you know, ambush, you know, you're trained to run to the ambush. You know, don't dive off the trail because they probably have a trap for you there.
Yep.
You know, the instinct for people would be to dive for cover. That's probably where they have put something to trap you, or something to blow you up, or
Yep.
punchy sticks, or whatever it is. Those kinds of things, you have to train, you have to drill, you have to get to where it's instinctive. But when someone's lost a parent, I'm dealing right now with a family where the father just passed away, and the whole family, I talked with them, and I said, let's not really talk about what to do next until after you have buried your father and you've had your memorial service, and you can kind of deal with that. That's the most important thing when someone passes away, is for the family to deal with burial, and at least start the grieving process before we start talking about, you know, the financial side and implementing a will or implementing a trust. And I assure people when they call in, these things, you know, most things don't have to be dealt with right away. If there's a mortgage payment coming up, then, you know, and you don't have access to the funds from mom's account to make that mortgage payment because she always wrote a check, well, then that's maybe a little urgency. Maybe the family needs to figure out a way to make that payment themselves and sort it out later. But if there's just a will, you're not going to be able to act quickly at all. This is why I advocate, even for people that don't have an estate that would ordinarily be subject to probate, that they still consider having a trust, because with a trust or a living trust, you can name someone to take over immediately from you if you're incapacitated or when you pass away. You don't have to spend the 2.5 or 3 months to go into court to get authority to act. Instead, the authority's already there ahead of time in a document you prepared that says, hey, if I become incapacitated, my son Johnny is now my trustee. When I die, Johnny is my trustee. Johnny can take over the bank accounts, the brokerage accounts. He can change the title on the real estate to him as trustee now, just with paperwork involving a death certificate. As soon as you can get a death certificate issued, which if you're going through a mortuary, that can be done pretty quickly, then you can take over and start handling things. And for my older clients, sometimes they put a child or two on at the beginning as co-trustees with them, so that Johnny can sign the checks for dad because dad's tired of signing the checks. Then dad becomes incapacitated. Johnny's already a trustee. They don't have to demonstrate that dad's now incapacitated by going back to the doctor. Dad passes away. Johnny's already a trustee. He doesn't have to produce a death certificate. He's already on the accounts. He's already on the title. He can start acting immediately after taking time out to deal with getting dad buried and starting the grieving process.
Right.
You don't have to rush around and panic, because I see that a lot. Especially when people walk in and My mom died. She has a house. There's no will. There's no trust. And
what do I do?
nobody has any idea what to do. Nobody has any idea what mom wanted. And I tell them it kind of doesn't matter what mom wanted. If she didn't have a plan, the state has written the plan for you. It's what we call the laws of intestate succession. Intestate means no will. And as I say, it's basically a fancy term for who gets your stuff when you die if you didn't plan. That's what the laws of intestate succession are. That's the fancy term that lawyers use. For the general public, who gets your stuff when you die if you didn't have a plan? That's really all it is. And so it doesn't matter what mom wanted then. It's what the law says everybody gets.
Right.
And that could end up being a very horrible result for the family, especially when I then find out that, well, my brother Jim is a drug addict, and he, you know, and he's mostly living in halfway houses and on the street. And anytime he gets any money, he goes and he buys drugs, and I'm afraid he's going to overdose someday. And I have to tell them, well, you know, is there anything we can do to prevent my brother Jim from getting his inheritance? And all I can say is, unless he voluntarily agrees to something, the answer is no. And I'm sorry to tell you, but you may lose your brother Jim because he receives the inheritance directly. I mean, I lost a cousin that way.
Yeah.
So this is a very real, painful subject for me, but I share that with people in my seminars. I lost a cousin to drugs. And I lost the cousin to drugs because he was a drug addict, but he could never really afford to buy enough drugs to be serious.
Right.
You know, he'd get some money, he'd buy some drugs, he'd get high, but he never had enough. Then my uncle passed away, who was a very wealthy man. He left everything in a trust for my aunt and his sons. But unlike what I advise people to do, he directed in his trust. I think he had his banker and his lawyer were the trustees, which I would not recommend. But he had instructions in the trust, basically, give them whatever they want. That's the way my uncle treated them when he was raising them. He completely spoiled my cousins rotten. It didn't turn out well for any of them, as you might imagine. And so now here was my cousin with the drug problem. And he basically said, hey, give me money. Dad said I get, you know, whatever I want, give me money. And he got plenty of money, and he overdosed. Because now he had plenty of money to buy the good stuff and lots of it. And so when I have to tell a family, when I have to tell siblings that their brother or sister might very well die because of the lack of planning of the parent, and I do it in a nice way, but you can't really sugarcoat that. It's happened in my family, and it happens in families all the time. Now, is there a way to avoid that? Absolutely. If you know that you have a child that is special needs, or a child that may not be defined legally special needs, but you know they are because they are an addict, an alcoholic, financially incompetent, all kinds of people. There's high functioning addicts and alcoholics out there. I've known some in my life. I've known a high functioning alcoholic who held down a job, raised a family, and thank God he finally took the plunge and got clean and sober. And he's a lot nicer guy now than he was in the past. And I loved him to death. And I love him even more now because he's clean and sober. But if you've got someone in the family that is special needs, or even you consider special needs, you know, the government doesn't necessarily define everybody who's special needs. We know who we're talking about in the family. Yeah, my brother, he can't keep a job. He's bright. You know, he graduated maxima cum laude from college, but financially he's an idiot. Okay, being intelligent doesn't translate to fiscal competence. I mean, and just becoming older doesn't translate to fiscal competence. People can be in relationships, married or unmarried, that are financially, physically, emotionally, spiritually damaging to them. I've had many clients tell me that, I don't want to leave anything directly to my son because his wife spends every dime he makes and demands more. And I know if I leave it directly to my son, she's going to take it all and spend it and he'll have nothing.
Yep.
And I go, yep, I would consider that son to be disabled by their marriage, by being married in a marriage that is financially disruptive and financially a disability. So we can leave assets in trust for people. If they're special needs, we can leave them in a supplemental needs trust that says this inheritance is not owned by this child of mine. It's there to supplement whatever benefits they may be entitled for because of their disability, whether it's their income through SSI, whether it's Medi-Cal for their health insurance, whether it's Section 8 housing. Those are things provided by the government. But what if my son's a paraplegic? What if he can work, but he has no way to get around? Well, a trust like that could buy him a specially equipped van with a lift gate in the back and hand controls to drive the van. This is an actual client of mine a number of years ago, had $80,000. That's all the client had, but the son was paraplegic and worked. So he was mentally competent, but physically disabled. And so it's like, well, I don't want to give him the money. If I give him the money, he's going to lose some benefits he has. So we actually set up a trust, and then the trust bought the van for the son. The trust owned the van, and the son got to use it. He didn't own it. The trust owned it, but his problem was solved. Now he had a vehicle so that he could get around and do the things he needed to do. And that's just one example. But then if someone is fiscally incompetent, or they're in a bad relationship, or they've joined they've joined a cult. They've joined a cult that requires people to turn over their worldly wealth to achieve nirvana.
Oh yeah.
Cults like that exist.
I love that.
Parents don't want the kids receiving an inheritance and handing it over to the guru or whatever in the cult that they're in. Those cults are real. They're not widespread, but I'll tell you what, I've had clients that have had children in cults. And they say, they want to make sure they're cared for. Maybe they'll come out of it someday. They want to make sure they don't come out penniless. So you put the property in a trust so the child doesn't own it, and you give instructions to the trustee, provide for the child's needs as those needs appear. That way you can provide for a child who's living in a halfway house or on the street. You can have funds there for them to go into a program to get cleaned up, to support them, to make sure that they have food. I mean, literally, to make sure. I had two sisters worried about their brother who was living on the street. And it was set up with them handling the funds for their brother. And that was literally so they could make sure their brother had food to eat every month. Because if the money went to him, he'd just stick it in his arm.
Right.
Or up his nose, or down his throat. That people kill themselves that way. You don't want to give sums of money to people who are addicts. You don't want to give large sums of money to someone who just turned age 18. And that's what happens if there's no planning. I mean, I remember being an 18-year-old boy, and I use the term boy intentionally. In my opinion, and some may disagree with me, if you're 18 years old, male or female, you're a boy or a girl unless you're active duty military, training to be an EMT, firefighter, or police officer, or something similar. If you're going to college, you're a boy or a girl. I mean, I went through college. I was a boy. I don't consider, personally, I don't consider I became a man until I graduated from law school and passed the bar. And I was 25. That's when I really considered myself to be an adult, because now I was about to do an adult job. Up till then, I hadn't done an adult job. I was legally an adult, but I didn't consider myself to be an adult yet. And certainly at age 18, the 18-year-old boy is probably going to do what? You tell me, Vito. You're 18, you just inherited $250,000. What are you going to do? Go to a financial advisor to help you invest it for a safe and secure retirement? Or
go to a bar and buy everybody a drink until
at
the money
18,
comes out.
with the fake ID? Hard to do fake IDs nowadays with all the holograms and all this. Back in the day, though, you could have a fake ID and do that. But
Yeah.
what is an 18-year-old boy's dream purchase?
Oh, really fast car.
Really fast car, yeah. So a certified pre-owned Toyota Corolla, right? No, not at all. What's back when I was in 18, it would have been whatever Steve McQueen was driving.
Yeah. Could have been, well, back then it's probably what?
Trans Am, Corvette.
Cougar.
Back then, a Mustang. Mustangs were cool until girls started driving them.
Yeah.
Then they weren't cool, but they're cool again. Mustangs are cool again. Corvettes. Today, probably the sports car, the primo sports car people are looking at is a Tesla. That's like, not a Maserati or Porsche or Ferrari. Those are so, gee, that's what grandpa would drive. Those really are. But now it's a Tesla. So that 18-year-old boy is going to go out and buy a Tesla. Probably wrap it around a tree within a year. Maybe walk away unscathed. But at the end of the year, that 18-year-old is going to have no money left from the inheritance, driving a sports car that they can't afford the insurance for, because it's a healthy 5 figures a year for insurance for a teenage male driver driving a sports car. I had a point in my life where I actually leased a Ford Probe, which was basically a Mazda design that Mazda didn't build, so they sold the design to Ford. It was a 6-cylinder, had a V6. That sucker could move. Now, this was when I was in my 40s, so it might have been one of those midlife crisis kind of cars. I was actually driving that car when I met my wife. And she went in the car one time and said, I don't like this car, because you had to kind of almost crawl into it from street level. It was slung so low. It was fast. I'll make the admission, I was on Highway 280 one night, coming back from San Francisco. I had been rehearsing a show with the Lamplighters of San Francisco, the Gilbert and Sullivan Society there. And I was coming home, it was about 11:30 at night on 280. Nobody else on the freeway. So I just said, let's see what this car can do. I think I got up to about 110 miles per hour in second gear when I said, okay, this is a powerful car. I did get rid of the car after that because it was not practical as a car.
Right.
But for a time there, I drove a sports car. And I understand why people love sports cars, because the power is amazing. To be able to go 110 miles an hour in second gear and still know that I've got more. And the speedometer went to 140. Your typical cars don't go to 140. You can't go that fast. They have governors built in. This thing could hit 140. And I didn't push that because I wasn't interested in becoming roadkill, because I'd never driven a vehicle that fast. But see, that's the 18-year-old boy. Now, how about the 18-year-old girl? What do they want to buy?
A house.
Well, if we go stereotypical, okay, if it was my wife at 18 and she had a ton of money, I know what she would have bought, because it's what she buys today. Designer shoes, handbags, couture,
yeah,
things like that. Now, nowadays, an 18-year-old girl is just as likely to want to buy the fancy car as the boy. See, the other thing boys buy boys would buy is a fully tricked out, like Ford F-150 or F-250 pickup truck. That's
Raised up,
that's
breed-
to impress the buddies.
right.
The guy who wants to pick up girls gets the sports car. The guy who wants to impress his friends buys the truck with the chrome wheels, the extra high wheels, fully tricked out, the stereo system, everything else like that. If you're in Texas, the mandatory gun rack. You can laugh at that if you want to. That's okay.
No, I'm just imagining all my buddies that have those big trucks. I have a truck, but it's just a 1500 standard stock, you know, has floor steps or side steps on the side, but it didn't even come with that. So I put those on aftermarket, and then I put leather seats in aftermarket because I take.
Go. See now,
Right?
now, when you actually step back and say, who really needs a truck?
My clients do.
Your clients do.
Yep. So they get an appliance. They need to get some materials from Lowe's. They buy a furniture. They don't want to have it delivered.
So you need a truck because the work that you do needs a truck to transport things. Plumbers need trucks. Electricians need trucks. Carpenters need trucks. Contractors need trucks. I'll tell you who doesn't really need trucks. Software engineers.
Oh.
You know, lawyers, doctors, you know, unless they're rural doctors and they're driving out to someone who's, you know, 10 miles back a dirt road. But the reality is that 18-year-old boys who want to buy that sports car or trucks, you know, when you're 40, you may still want to do that, even though you don't need this. The types of trusts that I prepare, and I recommend people consider living trusts, are leaving inheritance in trust for, certainly for your children who might be disabled or might be disabled in your mind because of their fiscal incompetence or something like that, but leave property in trust for your other children as well, so that they don't actually own the inheritance. And sometimes I make the joke in my seminars, one of the most loving things you can do for your children is to disinherit them. It's like, what? What are you talking about? I mean, don't leave them anything? No, I said disinherit them. Don't leave anything directly to them. Because if you leave it directly to somebody, it is subject to being lost any number of ways. I don't care if your child is a highly compensated surgeon and fiscally and does their own investments and is brilliant at it. One malpractice claim could take that all away from them.
Yep.
They make a big enough error, they could find their malpractice insurance doesn't cover it, and now their personal assets are at risk and the inheritance they received from you. But if you leave the inheritance in a trust for a child, you have now built what I call a castle wall around that trust. I actually call it castle trust planning. And everybody can picture a castle. I mean, you know, in my seminars, I say, okay, right now, everybody picture a castle. Wait a few seconds to say, how many saw Sleeping Beauty's castle at Disneyland? And usually about, you know, most of the people raise their hands. Yeah, that's what I saw. Now I can see other castles because I've visited other castles in the world when I was younger and also as an adult, you know, like the Tower of London, Windsor Castle, the Imperial Palace in Kyoto, Japan, which is amazing and it's gorgeous.
Yep.
The Heidelberg Schloss in Germany, which is another castle in Heidelberg. But most people see Sleeping Beauty's castle. Say, oh, go tell me about Sleeping Beauty's castle. Well, first of all, it's got high walls. They're thick. What's it surrounded by? Oh, there's a moat and there's a drawbridge, right? Yeah, it doesn't go up and down, but in a real castle, it goes up and down. So why did they build castles? They built castles to protect the people inside. But if you're the king or the duke or the earl or whatever, what are you really worried about more than your people?
Bad people getting in.
That, because what do you have stored inside your castle? In a heavily barred room with a key, entrusted to your highest, most trusted advisor?
Gold
Gold,
or sleeping.
gems, the wealth of your kingdom or dukedom or earldom.
That's right.
And that's what a castle, what I call the castle trust, is take the inheritance, put it into a treasure chamber inside a castle so that everything that could come against a person in their lifetime is now barred, either completely or seriously hampered in trying to get to that inheritance. You do something like that, you can put the ability to protect that inheritance in the 90th and better percentile. If you hand it to the person, the ability to protect the inheritance is zero. Because once it's put in that person's pocket, it's subject to lawsuits. It might end up subject to divorce because they don't handle the inheritance properly and they inadvertently mix it into their marriage, which happens all the time. Then the divorce comes and half their inheritance, which may include real estate they inherited, half of it now ends up going out with the divorcing spouse because it wasn't kept segregated from the marriage. Someone becomes injured and becomes a special needs person later. Now it's like, okay, this inheritance might have to be used up for their care. They don't qualify for any assistance of any kind because they have all these funds sitting over here they inherited. And especially for professionals. Professionals, no professional should ever want to inherit directly from a parent. If you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're an architect, a civil engineer that designs buildings or bridges, that's something my dad did back in the 30s. He was a civil engineer. He did designs of buildings and bridges and structures. Well, if you make a mistake and the building collapses, you're going to get sued for malpractice. If you're a doctor, you make a mistake, you're going to get sued for malpractice. Realtors can be sued for malpractice. Anybody that can have malpractice insurance can be sued for that. And if you fly without it, and I know there's many attorneys that don't have malpractice insurance, I personally don't think I need it. My wife insists that I have it. She's also an attorney. Her firm pays for hers, I pay for mine. You know, I pay for it, you know, I just buy it every year. Never used it, just like I buy, you know, I buy homeowners insurance every year, and I hope I never use it. But having an inheritance at risk, as well as personal assets, someone could be wiped out by a malpractice claim. But if their inheritance is sitting over in the castle here, they now have something to fall back on, something to draw against, something to rebuild their lives. If it's all lumped in with personal assets, it could be lost. Right. So I focus on, in my planning, on how inheritances are lost and what I think are the best ways to leave an inheritance to the next generation so that it cannot be lost, or you minimize the chance that it could be lost. And I'll tell you, I look at a lot of trusts that are brought in by people. People come in, they attend a seminar, they watch my seminar on my YouTube channel, which has been up for, I don't know, since, let's see, I did it back in 2014. And my original seminars on my YouTube channel, it has over 56,000 views now. It went viral a couple of years ago. Of course, in the YouTube sense, viral.
Right.
And I have people come there, they come through Yelp, all these places. And a lot of people say, hey, we did this trust 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Well, you know, what would you charge to review it for us? I say, I won't charge you anything. Just get a copy to me before we talk about it. And then I will give my feedback. I'll ask you, is this what you wanted? I find a lot of times what people thought they signed wasn't what they signed. Well, the trust says this happens when one of you dies. What? That's not our understanding. I said, well, that's what it says. Gee, that was never explained to us by the lawyer 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Right.
Or they find out some serious flaws. I always warn people ahead of time. Interest, full disclosure. If you come to see me and show me a trust that you have, I'm going to warn you ahead of time. You're probably going to end up hiring me to redo it entirely. So just be prepared for that. You know, I very rarely see a trust where I say, yeah, this checks off all the boxes. This was well drafted. And when that happens, it's because it's from a practitioner that I probably personally know, and I know the quality of their work.
Mm-hmm.
If I can say, oh, this was prepared by so-and-so, I'd say, well, it's probably just fine. But let me take a look and see if there's maybe anything that could be added to it, because it's been a while.
Yeah. Because laws change.
Laws change, yeah.
Right.
We've had major changes. When I started practicing law, a huge change in law took place shortly after I started. That was the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981 under Reagan.
Mm.
He managed to get that through a Democratic Congress and sign it into law. And that's what put in initially what we now call the exclusion amount, which back then was called the unified tax credit, which is a certain amount of property that you can pass on at death to anyone you wish and have it not subject to federal estate tax, which is a wealth transfer tax at the federal level. It started out at $200,000 per eligible person dying. That was back right after I started practicing law, which seems like, you know, when Moses and I went to law school. But back then it was 200,000. It started going up. That exclusion today is over $11.5 million per person dying who's eligible. To be eligible, you're a US citizen or permanent resident. That's the eligibility right now. If you're not a citizen and not a permanent resident, you can pass on $60,000 without an estate tax. It's so huge difference there. Those of you, if you're considering becoming permanent residents, you've been putting it off, it's going to be a little harder right now with the most recent executive order that just came out. But consider that. Because if you have made your fortune here in the Silicon Valley, you know, with that company you founded or where you're working, you may find out very rapidly that a lot of it could be dissipated. Say 40% of that fortune go into the federal government when you die because of your citizenship status, your immigration status.
Wouldn't you be able to that income into, let's say, an LLC or a corporation to help protect that? There's other loopholes that you can do, right?
Do you still own it? See, I mean, that'd be the question. You put it in an LLC. Do you own the LLC?
Yeah.
It's still your asset.
So then
that asset's still part of your estate. The only way that you can reduce your estate, well, there's a couple of ways, but the most direct way is to start gifting property now.
Right.
For example, you can give $15,000 per year per person of value of property to anyone you wish without incurring a gift tax. Now, what that means is if grandma and grandpa want to start transferring their wealth to their grandkids and their kids, well, grandma and grandpa can each give $15,000 to each grandchild, each child, the spouses of the grandchildren and the child and the children as well. And they can do that every year.
But that's a work, right? I mean, it's probably better done in a trust.
I would think so. I would think so. The thing is, if you set it up in a trust, we have some quirky rules about trust. You could say, I'm going to gift it to a trust for my grandson, Johnny, who's 25. Well, in order to have it be a completed gift, Johnny has to have the right to take that money from the trust right away if he wants to.
Hmm.
It's what's called a crummy power, not crummy like lousy, CRUMMEY. It's a court case. And if he doesn't have the right to just tell the trustee, give me the 25,000, then it wasn't really a true gift because he doesn't have the right to take it. So to truly get it out of your estate, you have to either hand it directly to them or put it in a trust with a withdrawal right. Now, what you do is you kind of tell Johnny, I'm putting $25,000, or I'm putting $15,000 from each of us, so $30,000 a year, we're going to put it in this trust for you. You're going to have the right to withdraw it. But let me tell you, grandson of mine, If you take a dime of it, no more money's going in. No, seriously, absolutely
Yeah.
seriously. It's like, look, we're doing this for you so that you have money to build up for the future when you need it, may need it later on. But if you get greedy, if you decide, well, yes, you tell the trustee, yes, send me the 30 grand. That's the last 30 grand you're seeing from us. And we may decide to exclude you from our plan entirely because you've demonstrated that you're not worthy to receive anything from us because you couldn't follow that one simple request, which is don't touch it.
Instead, you took.
Grandparents and parents have a lot of clout. Unlike many countries, like if you go to Europe, if you're in Germany, for example, and your parent dies and you're the child, it doesn't matter if you've been estranged from your parent for 50 years, you hate their guts, they hate your guts, you're entitled to a statutory percentage of their property when they die. You can treat the parent like crap in Germany, and you're still entitled to receive property from their estate when they die. That is European system, that you can't disinherit. You can leave them more, but you can't cut them out. You cannot disinherit your children in Germany and most of Europe.
So no matter what, whether you're, whatever their terms are, whether you're in a probate or a trust, that each children gets even percentage. Or
well,
each,
it depends on what the plan says.
yeah.
I mean, I have clients that have said, okay, we have our son John is disabled. Okay, maybe mentally disabled. He will need care the rest of his life. So they get together with the other kids and they say, look, Janie, Jimmy, your brother John is going to need care for the rest of his life. We're setting up our estate plan so that when we pass away, you're each getting 20%, 60% is going to go into a supplemental needs trust for your brother. And when he passes away, it's then going to be distributed onto you or your children if you've already died. We're letting you know that up front. And in good families, the response of the kids is going to be, yeah, we're on board with that because we know our brother's going to need care his whole life. We're on board with you setting aside a larger portion for him to make sure that there's assets there to care for him. And we're willing to wait until he passes away for it to pass to us or to our kids. Because we're okay. We're working, we're gainfully employed, we have our own assets, our own wealth. And now that's a good family.
Well, and we're responsible adults.
And we're responsible adults.
Yeah.
Now, the wrong thing to do, and I actually have an article that I can give people, which is basically 10 ways to, I can't remember what I call it, but it's kind of like a 10 ways thing. 10 ways to foul up planning for your special needs child. And one of them that a lot of people do is they say, well, I'm just going to leave everything to my other children and tell them to take care of their brother. Yeah, right. In a good family, they'll do that. But what happens when the siblings die? What happens to the money that was left them to take care of their disabled brother? Unless they did planning to make sure that that money is set aside for their brother, guess where it's going? It's going to their families. So that's not good planning. Yeah, I've seen people that have disinherited their disabled children because they say, well, because the government will then take care of them. And I point out, you know what? Every single program in place to take care of people who are disabled and have no resources, those didn't exist 100 years ago, did they? Most of them didn't exist 50 years ago. What makes you think that they're going to exist in the future? They're created by government. Do you think government can change its mind?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Do you think if government looks and says, okay, we have too many people in the Medi-Cal program, we can't afford to take care of all these people anymore, we're just getting rid of the program and people can die.
Yeah, especially now with this pandemic.
Oh yeah,
I hear California coffers are running low, if not completely drained out right now.
yeah.
And, you
And we
know,
have people proposing to put everybody who's lost their job, put everybody on Medi-Cal.
yeah.
That's like we're going to put everybody at the VA. And look how well that's turned out. Okay. I have friends that use VA services who are veterans, and they've been fortunate in finding good offices, good VA hospitals, but there's other ones that are atrociously bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that you might have to wait 6 months to have a necessary surgery or a necessary test or something, it's like, welcome to socialized medicine. That's basically, the VA is basically socialized medicine. If you're on Medi-Cal, that's basically socialized medicine.
Right.
And if they run out of money, they run out of money. Doctors and nurses aren't going to work for free. They can't work for free. They have mouths to feed.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people, do not rely on the government to take care of your child when you're gone. Set assets up in a trust that can be used to supplement whatever benefits they receive from the government. And if the government takes a benefit away, there's resources to pick up the slack. If there's no resources, then your child goes without. And for many people who are special needs, going without likely means their life ends. They literally die because they're not getting the care or the resources they need.
Mm-hmm.
And the quality of life plummets maybe overnight. So I do special needs planning for special needs people as part of what I do. I don't do Medi-Cal planning per se. I have a colleague that is excellent at that. It's 90% of his practice. So people who need to actively do that planning, like mom's going to go into a nursing home, what can we do to preserve as much of mom's property as possible, so we don't have to spend everything at $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a month or $12,000 a month because there's Alzheimer's unit.
Right.
What can we do? Well, I have a colleague that knows what we can do, and there's still a lot we can do in California. We can do things in California they can't do in the other 49 states, because California Department of Health Services, I'll go ahead and say it, because they're incompetent.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have not written up or promulgated regulations from the last two Medicaid laws, which is Medi-Cal in California. We're still operating under rules from like 20 years ago. The other states have caught up, and there's things they can't do planning-wise anymore that we've been able to do all along. And I have colleagues in other states say, you can still do what? It's like, oh yeah, it hasn't changed here yet, and it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. But yeah, there's a lot of planning that can be done. One of the basic forms of planning that I'll share with you all out there. If you have a parent who just has a house, just a house, Social Security check, maybe a tiny pension from the place they worked, and a house in this valley, and the house that your parents bought for $15,000, $20,000, maybe $75,000, and now it's worth $600,000, $700,000, $800,000, $900,000, $1 million, $1.5 million,
Or $3 million, yeah.
or $3 million. Your mom, who's now 85 years old, lives in Willow Glen in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house that's valued at $1.8 million. It's 1,000 square feet, by the way, and hasn't been improved in any way since it was purchased, but it's sitting on some of the most valuable dirt in the county. Mom can protect that house from Medi-Cal just by setting up a living trust and transferring the title into a living trust.
Right.
It's an exempt asset for purposes of eligibility for assistance for long-term care to pay for a nursing home.
Right.
It's also now an exempt asset for recovery from the state. That is huge.
Can you do that?
That is huge.
You can do that with an automobile too, right? With a car, because they need to, if they're still living in that house, they still need to go have
Oh yeah.
access.
The Medi-Cal rules basically say this is what someone can own
Right.
and still qualify for Medi-Cal. They can own a personal residence. And now if they put that into a trust, before, without that, they could own a personal residence and qualify for Medi-Cal. But Medi-Cal is kind of like running a bar tab at Cheers. Okay, hey Norm, Cliffy, they run a bar tab. But what happens at the end of the month? You pay the tab, right? You don't have to pull your wallet out, throw cash down, or take your card. No, they run a tab for you. They note down at the end of the month you had 55 beers and and one shot of whiskey or something, and you pay the tab. That's what Medi-Cal is. It's a bar tab. Now, when the person passes away, they may not have anything, and so the bar tab doesn't get paid. But before, if the person had a personal residence, and with a few exceptions, if they had that residence, now here's the bar tab from the state. Now they have this house worth $1 million, free and clear, and the state says, great, now pay us back. Now pay us. That may
But
mean sell the house to pay the state. But
right,
now, by putting the house into a trust, the state presents its bar tab at the end. It's like there's nothing, because now they can only collect against a probate estate, not against a trust.
got it.
So
So
there's a
with that,
reason not to go through probate if you own real estate.
it's my understanding that, and I've seen this happen before, and it might have changed since then, but my understanding is if you didn't have a trust at one time, and then you put the house and the property into the trust, and then like a year later, that parent is found incompetent with Alzheimer's, dementia, what have you, Medicare, Medicaid, Medi-Cal can go back 3 years to see where the assets were. Is that correct?
Well, what you might be referring to is if someone transfers the property away from themselves into an irrevocable trust.
Right.
That would be considered a transfer not for value or not for consideration, a gift, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
And Medi-Cal can look back in California 30 months and say, were any gifts made in the last 30 months? In the California scheme, because they haven't updated the law yet, let's say that grandma gave $50,000 to her grandson Johnny for tuition for school and did that 2 years ago. At the time grandma did that, grandma was flush. She had all these great investments and everything, and $50,000 was not a big deal. 2 years later, the market falls apart. Grandma's investments plummet. Now they're worth, maybe she loses everything, and now grandma has to go into a nursing home because she's become incapacitated. She lost everything. Medi-Cal is applied for. So what they'll do is they'll look back and say, were there any gifts made in the last 30 months? Yes, 2 years ago, grandma gave $50,000 to her grandson, Johnny. In California, they'll look at that and they'll say, okay, what is the monthly amount to pay for nursing home care in the county where grandma lives, as determined by the state? They do this on a county by county basis. And let's say here in Santa Clara County, let's just say it's $8,000. So under the California rules, they'll look back and say, we'll take that $50,000 gift, divide it by 8,000, and we come up with, what does that end up being? Like six and a fraction?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll say that's 6 full months, and the fractional month doesn't count. So 6 times 8, 48, and the 2,000 would be another quarter, but we don't count fractional months. So 6 months, for 6 months, grandma's not eligible for Medi-Cal, starting from the date of the gift. So what does that mean? It means that 2 years ago, for 6 months, she couldn't get Medi-Cal. But it's 2 years later. The gift doesn't matter anymore.
Okay.
because the ineligibility period expired a year and a half ago. Now, in the rest of the country, they go back 60 months, 5 years.
That's crazy.
And if you made that gift, and of course, who knows 5 years ago that I'm going to be wiped out in the market and then I'm going to need to go into a nursing home? Of course, nobody would. Who would expect that? Instead, they go back, they do the same calculation, but now it's 6 months from the date of application for the benefit. Now, 6 months prospectively, you apply for Medicaid in other states, and now it's like, well, you're ineligible for 6 months because you made this gift 4 years ago. Oh my gosh. That's horrible. You can imagine. What does that mean? It means the family literally has to figure out, how do we pay for grandma's care in the nursing home for 6 months until Medicaid kicks in? And what if the family has no ability to do that?
Right.
What happens to grandma? Do we put grandma out at the curb? Do we follow the practice of the Inuit and just send grandma out to go find a place to sit on the ice until she dies? I mean, there are, cultures where old people literally, when they reach the end of their life, they go away to die.
They go into the dying cave. Yep.
They go to a place to die, and they stop eating, stop drinking, they just die because there's no way to care for them. What happens to someone where there's literally, hopefully there might be charities that might come in, there may be organizations that can help, there may be nursing homes somewhere that will take people in regardless of ability to pay because they're supported by charity. There may be, a Sisters of Mercy kind of place that will take someone in.
But those are filled up.
But yeah, so that's a huge problem. Here in California, at least we can do planning.
Right.
And really, we're not expecting it to change anytime soon because the state hasn't gotten its act together for over 20 years. We really don't expect it to get its act together anytime soon. We've been told consistently for 20 years, yeah, the regulations are coming soon. Yeah, they're coming soon. And that falls in the same category of the check is in the mail. And I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. Those of us from the wimpy generation remember Popeye cartoons. Yeah. And it's like, it just never happens. And because it never happens, it means that we can do a lot more planning here in California. Even late in the game, we can do planning. There's a nifty little trick called gift stacking, which hasn't been able to be done in the rest of the country for years. And basically, the rules say if a gift is made and the gift is less than that, say that $9,000, then it doesn't count at all because it's less than a full month. And if you make a gift that's more than that, then say it is a full month, say you gave $9,000 to someone, well, then that is 1 month of ineligibility, and a month later, the ineligibility expires. Well, what if it's $9,000 and you make a gift of $8,500 on the first of the month? There's no time period that it expires. What if on the second of the month you gave another $8,500? Again, doesn't trigger a month at all. What if on the third day, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
It's called gift stacking. Each day of the month, 30 days of the month, if you gave, say, $8,000 a day, at the end of the month, you've given away $240,000 and not triggered in any ineligibility for Medi-Cal. That's called gift stacking. It's perfectly legal. It requires, obviously, planning and requires implementation. But it's a way to legally, and I'll use the term, game the system. It's like attorneys did not create the system. Attorneys find ways to use the system to benefit their clients. Setting aside the moral implications or the ethical implications of, well, should a family do that? Legally, they can do that. And it's done all the time.
Right. You know, I talk to people, all my vets, all my veterans, and I talk to them about getting into the VA, and a lot of them are like, well, I never hurt myself when I was on duty, on active duty. And it's like, that's not the point. If you can show that you got hurt somehow, if you have tinnitus, if you got stitches, some kind of a form, you go to the VA so you get rated. And there's a whole plethora, and I have a whole couple videos on why you should do that. It's not to game the system or abuse the system. It's to use the system that we earned.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah,
I mean, my dad went to the VA. My
right.
dad was career Air Force. He served in World War II flying. And after the war, when stationed in Austria, my dad took off in a trainer plane to log flight hours, because he had to do that to maintain his flight rating. And as he was taxiing down the runway towards the Black Forest, the nose wheel on his plane started to collapse. And he was already taxiing at, I don't know, 80 miles an hour, 90 miles, approaching takeoff speed for this plane. And the nose wheel started to collapse. And as he put it, he had to avoid slamming into the forest, because he said, in that instant, I mean, he had flown 20,000 hours or more. Instantly, he knew, if I take off, I won't be able to land properly. I will crash land. So as he said, I jinked the wheel over and swerved, passed between a parked plane and a fuel truck, and slammed into a building. It broke my dad's back, shattered one of his ankles. I still have the accident investigation photos that he was given afterwards, showing like his cockpit, the condition it was in. It was crumpled, and it was black and white, but you could clearly see my dad's blood stains all over the place. I mean, it's kind of freaky. He spent 6 months in the base hospital in a full body cast. 6 months later, he was discharged. He continued on active duty, only 10% rated disability. They rated him 10%. He didn't fly anymore. He couldn't fly anymore because that injury said he couldn't fly anymore. But he spent the rest of his career, another 18 years, at doing his job, which was as a meteorologist for the Air Weather Service and detachment commander for the weather detachments at the bases we were at. And he retired. And when he retired with his full pension, with his benefits and everything, but he retired with 10% disability. You know, and my dad did go to the VA. He went to, when Moffett was still open, he would go to the base hospital there. I went there when I was a teenager, because I was a dependent. And then he did go to the VA when he needed, when they closed that, he did go to the VA when he needed to go to the VA for things, because he earned it. He earned it. He served in a combat zone in the Pacific for 2.5 years.
Right.
He earned it. You know, he nearly died in a plane crash, on active duty. He earned it.
It's sad that the VA only rated him 10%.
No, I didn't say
He
that.
should have got full vote on that.
No, he got rated. His rating enabled him to continue on active duty for another 18 years.
Okay.
Because if they had rated him, they had rated him higher than that, they probably would have said, get out. Right. I think what it was, he was a major then. They would have said, major, your career's over. But instead it was, major, we're returning you to active duty. You're 10% rated. You can't fly anymore, but we need you for your skill set, not for your abilities as a pilot.
Right.
And so, and then after that, he went to command staff college to learn to be a commander. They promoted him to light colonel, and he got the lightning bolts on his cap.
The darts and fart?
Yeah, that's how you knew whether someone was commandery. They had the lightning bolts on their cap.
Right.
Not their day one, but when they were wearing dress uniform, stuff like that. And that's just what I remember. So that's, he served another 18 years. That was more than half of his career in the military after having crashed a plane and broken his back. I mean, I'm astonished by that. I still am constantly astonished by my dad and what he went through in his life and what he overcame, and how it never changed his mood, never changed his outlook, never changed his corny Nebraska sense of humor, never changed anything. And whenever I'm going through tough stuff, I try to picture my dad and say, how would my dad have reacted? And that often calms me down and go, my dad went through a war, broke his back, had a car crush his hand between the car and a jack when he was changing a tire.
Oof.
And had my mom had to back the car off of his hand and then find a hospital out in rural California where he could get fixed. They found a hospital. The doctor on call happened to be a hand surgeon and literally rebuilt my dad's hand. Came home. I didn't know this happened. No one in the family knew this happened. I go visit my dad at their house in Los Gatos. My dad's hand is all puffy and swollen, stitches. And I said, Dad, what the hell happened to your hand? And then he very calmly explains, oh yeah, this happened. And I'm going, what? And my dad's just calmly explaining, yeah, I was changing the tire and then the car slipped off the jack and crushed my hand and your mom backed it off. And then we found a hand surgeon rebuilt my hand. Like he had, like he'd gone to a store to pick up some oatmeal or something. It was that. I'm astonished by that. I'm astonished by that generation every time I meet someone from that generation.
Isn't it amazing? I remember the story. My wife's grandfather, he's a Navy vet and fought in the War of Okinawa. And just the stories and the fact that this guy at 86, 87 years old would ride his bike 20 miles every day in the Reading heat. And he just was a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
And, and then he crashed his bike, had to have his knee replaced a third time, I think. And the doctor said, no more bike riding, no more physical activity. And within 6 months, he was gone because you couldn't do that stuff anymore, right?
Yeah, my dad was playing golf and selling houses at 75.
That's great.
Wasn't slowed down at all. Then that old service injury caught up to him 40 years later.
Yeah.
And he had to go in. They went in, they fused 2 vertebrae. He actually went to Seton, and his surgeon was the same guy that operated on Joe Montana on his back. Mm-hmm. But the surgery didn't work, and my dad's health started declining after that. He couldn't play golf anymore. He couldn't sell anymore, and those were like the driving forces in his life to keep him active. And he started degrading after that.
You got to keep
first with physical degradation, then mental.
Yep, you got to keep your active as much as your muscles active, right?
Yeah, you got to, because it keeps your brain active. It all does. It all ties together.
It's absolutely true.
Do you have it? We've been at this for a while now. I can hear families stirring in the house here, and I don't want to keep them locked down in their rooms for too much longer. Are there any other things you'd like me to talk about in this? I think we've kind of rolled around and hit a lot of things that you wanted.
I think we talked about the differences between a will and a trust, but not really the cost differences. You mentioned that just having probate and you have an asset worth $1 million, you're looking at $23,000. If you have a trust, it's going to be a fraction of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, like my approach, when I do trust administration, some attorneys will do trust administration and they will charge the same amount as the statutory fees in a probate, which means there's no cost savings. It's just faster and more efficient, but they'll charge the same amount. Some attorneys will charge maybe 50% of that as a fixed fee. I approach probate, or rather trust administration, as an hourly basis. I find most trust administrations will take somewhere between 8 to 10 hours of my time. If it's a little more involved, maybe a few more hours of my time. But I just charge for the time that I spend working on the file rather than a percentage. That's my personal approach.
Okay.
Which means that, I've handled trusts that had $2 million worth of assets in them, and the family ended up paying me $5,000 or $6,000 to handle the administration. It would have been, if it had gone through probate, it would have been, like $35,000 in attorney's fees at a minimum.
Right.
And many attorneys would have charged them the $35,000 or $20,000 or even $15,000 or something like that. That's just my personal approach, because I find it's fair for me, because if it turns out to be more complicated, I haven't committed to do a whole bunch of things for a fixed amount. And it also means the family keeps more money in their pockets.
Right.
They get the work done for a fair price. I mean, I charge $500 an hour, which sounds like a lot, but my colleagues that I went to law school with are at $650 and $700 now. And there's attorneys in Los Angeles that charge $1,000 an hour, and some in New York that charge $2,000 an hour, if you can believe that.
When you're getting charged $15 for a sandwich and $4 a gallon. I know gas has gone down recently, but we're getting upwards of $4 a gallon. Cost of living here, it's crazy expensive, right?
Well, my family's, for example, gone to Cheesecake Factory for many years. My wife and I have gone there, since before we got married, and we're coming up on our 21st anniversary, so probably 23, 24 years. We'd go there, and we remember when you could get like the teriyaki chicken was like $8 or something like that.
Right.
Well, now it's over 20. It's the same meal, but it's not the same meal. The chicken's smaller. There's kind of less things there than there were before. The portions are smaller, and the price has gone up by 250%. And that's true. When I haven't purchased something for a long time, and then I go back to get it, and I go, oh my gosh, why is it so much more? We remember going to New York City. I don't know, when we first went to New York City, which was 2004, we saw like Wicked on Broadway.
Oh yeah.
With the original cast, Kristen Chenoweth, Idina Menzel. It's fantastic. We saw Avenue Q, which is basically the X-rated puppet show that won the Tony that year. But we went to this deli in Times Square, and they were charging $16 for a burger in 2004.
Yep.
That's basically what you're being charged for burgers now at like a BJ's Brew House or something.
Yeah.
Actually, it's less there. I can't even imagine what they're charging at this place in Times Square now, assuming it were open. What, $40 for a hamburger?
I remember we were there. We did the a weekend in New York, and we saw a show, and we went to like a pastrami place, but instead of we already ate, and I wanted a cheesecake. I went to this cheesecake place, and it was like $25 for a slice of cheesecake.
For a slice.
That was before we had kids.
Yeah.
For a slice.
And for $25, I think for $25, you might be able to buy a whole cheesecake from Cheesecake Factory, at least one of the simpler ones. Maybe it's 30, but still, that's quite a bit less.
Yes, because rent is super expensive, and cost of labor is expensive. Utilities and food is so expensive. But that gets back to why costs go up, and you have to do that. You have to pay that kind of stuff. And I've seen other people, when you're paying for a new trust, you're looking at anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. And yesterday I told you we started off, I think we paid $250 for a paralegal to do it, and it was just basically a blank slate.
Yeah.
Poorly written trust. But
people ask me, I mean, I always share my pricing up front. For an individual, including the transfer of real estate, which is included in that, it's like $4,000. For a couple, it's $5,000. For a couple who are and for a married couple, for a couple who are unmarried, which also includes a couple that are registered domestic partners, which is not recognized as a marriage at the federal level. So you can't really do a joint plan. That would be $6,000, because essentially I'm doing two individual plans that are probably coordinated. So I don't charge twice as much as an individual plan, but it's more than a married plan. And
Right.
I've had those fees for a couple of years now. I don't see any particular reason to raise those. I'm also an attorney provider for a number of legal plans that companies have, not the pay plans that companies have, because I don't work for them anymore, but there's other ones. And if people come to me through the plan, then they're usually eligible for a 20 or 25% discount off my fees, which I also extend if they want to have mom and dad do it, or if their brother or sister wants to do it as well, even though they're not members of the plan, I kind of include it as family, and I give the same discount there just as a courtesy.
It's group, it's a volume discount at that time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question. If there's no way, if somebody, let's say that my dad dies and he doesn't have a trust, there's no way to throw everything into the trust. It has to go through probate right away, right?
Well, if there is no trust, there is no way to create a trust post-mortem. You can't create it after the person's died. It's like a financial power of attorney. The authority ends the moment the person dies. It does not exist past the death.
Yeah.
So it can't be used. Many financial powers of attorney give the authority for the agent to actually create a trust and put the person's property into the trust as long as certain guidelines are followed. That can't be done after the person's died. The horse is bolted, the barn door is open. You can't put the horse back in the barn. It's just,
Right.
it's done. But I do tell people, if it's an urgent situation, I tell them, look, at least if you can't do anything else, get a trust set up list, have an asset list of everything the person owned, have them sign the trust, have them sign the list of everything they intend to be in the trust. And then if the person dies, at least we have a trust. If necessary, we can go to court. We can redo the trust to make it what it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
And we can go to court and use, say, a will that was prepared that says, give everything to my trust, and then an asset list showing everything intended to be in the trust that's signed by the person. We can go to court and have the court order all those assets into the person's trust so you don't have to go through probate. Those are two types of petitions I do regularly, and I do them actually for the clients of attorneys throughout the state of California, for their clients in other parts of the state, because I've worked out a way to do them in a court here in the Bay Area. As long as everybody who's affected agrees, we can go to court without a formal hearing and get an order signed to modify a trust, maybe to get rid of things that aren't needed anymore, or to transfer assets outside of the trust into the trust to avoid the probate process entirely. It's almost miraculous.
But it has to be done.
I've done that. You as a realtor, you can appreciate this.
Yeah.
I have done that type of petition to save sales that are in an active escrow set to close. And this is an advice to anybody out there who sells real estate. You take a listing, the first thing you do is get a prelim. If it's not your practice now, make it your practice now. You probably have a relationship with a title officer. First thing you take a listing, even before you take the listing, see if you can pull a prelim to make sure you know how it's titled properly. Because I can't tell you, I've done half a dozen in the last couple of years where people have, persons died. Well, of course, dad's house is in the trust. He put it in there. They sell the property. They get into escrow. They find out that dad took it out to refinance, never put it back in. Or they find out, oh, Dad never signed the deed, they never recorded it, or they never, just whatever, it's not in the trust.
Yep.
And so now, and we have an active escrow, there's no contingency. And we close in 2 weeks.
Right.
Now my record for this was getting called, talking to an attorney in Southern California, like in Orange County, on a Friday morning. They found out, they had delayed on this. They're trying to figure out, what do we do? What do we do? Then he happened to hear about me from another attorney that I'd worked for down there. And he contacted me and said, can you do this? And I said, is everybody on board? Yeah. Okay. So from Friday morning, I did all the paperwork over the weekend. Everybody signed it. They got it back to me. Monday afternoon, I went to court. I got the court order. I overnighted it to escrow. They closed on Tuesday.
Wow.
Because they were about to lose the buyer. So that's my record so far. From a Friday morning, Monday afternoon, Tuesday morning, FedExed, here's the order, they could close. The title could now close. They could insure the title, cleared it.
That's excellent.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, I had another one where there was a father and son were co-owners of a property, and dad had his half in his trust, or so everybody thought. And during the escrow, dad died, and it's like, well, that's no problem. Dad's half's in the trust. I take over as the trustee, and then guess what? Dad's half wasn't in his trust. Everybody thought it was, and it was the same situation. And
Yep.
they're scrambling. But I've saved probably 6 escrows that way. And that's why I contact title companies and title officers and tell them this is something I can do. I contact estate planning attorneys. There's too many realtors to contact. Just too many to try and contact them. But I joined the California Land Title Association as an affiliate, so that I wrote an article for them on these Hegstat petitions, which are the ones to get assets into the trust, put it in their newsletter. I advertise in their member guide. And I know that over time, I'm going to be getting more and more calls from title officers saying, Houston, we have a problem. We can't close this escrow.
Yep.
And, can you help? And in most cases, if everybody's on board with it, I can help, and I can do it quickly and solve that problem. Otherwise, they lose the sale. The seller might even get sued by the buyer because they sold the property and they didn't have the authority to do so because they were not actually the trustee, because it should have been a probate asset. So it can be a mess. It can be an absolute mess. But part of my job as an attorney is to do planning at the front end so that we don't have messes at the end when it's needed, and also to clean up messes that have already happened, the trusts that are already broken for some reason, or planning that was broken because assets didn't get into the trust. That's where I come in, and that's something I specialize in, which is why I now have probably 15 attorneys in the state so far that if something like this walks into their office, the first thing they do is pick up the phone and call. Bob, this just walked in. Say, well, okay, Joe, you know what to do. You've got the paperwork. Get the paperwork filled out, get it up to me, use the link, have them schedule a consult with me, and we'll talk about it and go over it, and I'll let them know whether or not I can help. And if I can help, then the next step will be, great, here's the paperwork to fill out, here's what I need. Actually, I already have everything I need, and I'll put together an engagement letter, I'll send it to you for DocuSign, I will draft, and I can often turn things around in 24 hours. And it's like, here's the draft client. Everybody signs DocuSign, boom. Before coronavirus, I would hand carry it to the court, walk out with a court order. Now I have to mail it, but still it's about a week from the time I mail it and I have a court order certified back in my hand that I can then overnight. Now what I'll probably do is, if they need it in an escrow right away, is I will mail it to the court with instructions, send a certified copy, here's an envelope for that, and it's going to go straight to the escrow with a cover letter I have already put in there, identifying the escrow so they know this is what it's for. And then let them know you will be getting mail from the court. and it will have the order you need to close. Because it shouldn't come through me and then have to be mailed again.
Right.
You know, so I'm going to just say direct it here.
You
I'll
need to
have a copy coming to me, so
Right.
I'll know that it's been done. And then I can call and say, did you get yours? I'll probably even go one step further and put together a FedEx pack and have it already filled out because I have a FedEx account.
Mhm.
And then just have a FedEx pack filled out for the escrow with instructions to the clerk, process a certified copy of the order, put it in the FedEx pack, seal, and then deliver to FedEx for overnight. Now that's service. That's customer service.
And experience, right?
And I have attorneys, especially in Southern California, where it's horrible going through the court system. I have attorneys that are overjoyed with that. So, are we ready to wrap up, Vito?
Yep, we can wrap up. Love to be able to
I
do.
think my wife has come upstairs. It looks like she's ready to head over to her computer, which is that way.
Well, have her say hi.
Okay, well, I don't think she wants to be in the video at all. She should. No. Okay, so we can do this again if you'd like, if you want
Love
to
to
get
do
more
this.
information. But why don't we say goodbye now?
We will.
And you take care.
Bob, thanks a lot for your time. It was
Okay,
great.
Vito, great chatting with you. Okay,
And I'll send out the video as quickly as possible.
great. So I'm going to log out now. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
All right.
You're sideways though. I'm not sure why.
Are you, hang on a sec. Let me try to flip this up.
There you go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Well, I mean, I can see either way. It just you started at a 90-degree angle. You had your picture was
Very
flipped.
cool.
Do me a favor real quick, take 2 seconds and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Also hit the like, the little thumbs up, and the little bell so you'll be notified of upcoming videos.